Thank you very much, Brian. And Rodney, I'm going to end up complimenting you a lot during this presentation because many of the concepts that you brought forward regarding zero trust and just-in-time and securing identities really focus in on what you can do for privileged account management and just-in-time. In other words, Rodney took the big, large swath of how to do it. We're going to focus really on those privileged accounts that have sensitivity in your organization, and not only talk about them from a Microsoft perspective, but how they can be basically managed and placed into an ephemeral state across the board, whether it's Mac, whether it's Unix, whether it's a network device, whether it's cloud, or whether it's IoT. Because really, privileged accounts anywhere can be leveraged against your organization, and we have to protect against the modern threats that face them. Now, today's landscape is quite interesting. 20 years ago, we really dealt with only having privileged accounts on premise. We really didn't worry as much about shared accounts. We really did not care that 2 or 3 people knew that password, or that that password was being used for the domain repeatedly every day, and it was stale. It's the truth. They were within our perimeter. We could control them. We knew what they were. And a lot of times people were scared to death to change them because we didn't know what would break. We don't know what applications we potentially install that use them, or even what service accounts may have had them coded in that no one ever documented. 10 years ago, we started to use hypervisors. We started to use the cloud. We started to virtualize everything. And we saw that erosion of the perimeter. We started seeing privileged accounts being used everywhere. And this is really where we ended up today with modern IoT and DevOps, and what the future is doing in terms of automation, that there's now privileged accounts everywhere. Really, anybody could use them at any time. Someone in marketing could have a privileged account to administer social media accounts used by the business. Someone in the call center or help desk organization may have the privileged accounts to do a remote session to fix someone's laptop. We're no longer only seeing privileged accounts just on premise or even in the cloud managing specific resources. They exist everywhere and with all different purposes. And if any of them are leveraged, it can lead to those types of lateral movements that Rodney talked about that could go from system to system and then ultimately own a critical asset or have access to sensitive data. And the statistics, unfortunately, are not in our favor. 62% of companies aren't adequately tracking privileged accounts. 80% of breaches result from privileged account abuse or misuse. 81% of breaches start with a stolen or weak password. And what's even worse, not to pick on Microsoft, is 90% of vulnerabilities are associated with excessive admin rights. And what this actually means is that if you remove admin rights, most vulnerabilities and exploits don't even work because they need admin rights in order to take advantage of the system, to write to the file system, to do something malicious. So it's critically important to remove administrative rights, just like Rodney said, wherever you can. Get rid of them. You'll find that the protection is so much more when you actually remove them. In fact, in speaking to a local SI just a few weeks ago, they saw a 95% drop in malware being reported by the help desk just by removing admin rights at the endpoint. Because even if someone clicked on something or did something wrong in phishing, we're human, we make mistakes. We're falling for some of these COVID-19 email attacks. The malware can't take advantage of the system because it's not being run as an admin. And for that SI to report a 95% drop once they removed admin rights, it's a testament that we really should be doing it everywhere. The problem is you still have to grant it for certain tasks, certain applications, and certain functions. And how do you do that seamlessly and easily? Zero trust is the model, just-in-time is the vehicle, because threat actors all around the world will be targeting your organizations and they really don't care. You may be opportunistic or you might be targeted, and they're going to go after the easiest place that they can. And as we've talked about, they start at the endpoint, most of the time via phishing, most of the time. or if you've misconfigured something in the cloud or done something poor in the cloud, like expose services that you shouldn't. But once they figure out how to penetrate your endpoint, they're looking for those critical admin credentials or power users. Because once they have them, they move laterally through your network, they own systems, try to stay stealthy until they can get to your sensitive data and you have a breach. We all have heard this story over and over again. But the point here is how do you remove those admin credentials from the end user or from anything that could be leveraged? Now, the current and weakest links, the easiest one is ransomware. We've all seen what's been in the news lately with MSPs. We've also seen a wide variety of new and creative ransomware attacks based on the current political climate and everybody working from home. It's a real threat. Don't think that you're immune if you have a machine at home and you're VPN'd into the corporate network, that your home machine or your corporate machine can't infect the environment for ransomware. If you're using VPN, you've just extended your network out. It is still the most major corporate and current weakest link. How do those threat actors use tools? They're scraping memory, looking for hashes, credentials, traditional pass to hash to find those credentials, or even stealing them from flat files, because too many people still just put them in spreadsheets. You know, we could pick on some of the things that have happened in the past, but you know what? It happens a lot where people are still just writing a file called passwords and not even considering password managers. Phishing attacks aside, plenty of them. There are plenty of them that try to spoof your AD credentials, your Azure AD credentials. Basically, you click on the link, and if you think that you're logging into the appropriate site, and it's fully spoofed. And then whether it's credential stuffing, spray attacks, dictionary attacks, there's a wide variety of privileged attacks against credentials. Threat actors will use the gamut of them to try to steal credentials or guess common credentials that you may have. And looking at the most popular passwords for 2020, it's apparent that we're still making those same mistakes over and over again. And then basic misconfigurations, especially in the cloud. We did some work, we brought up a new system, we thought we did it right, something got unhardened, someone didn't turn off RDP or close off a default account, and you know what? We've opened that door for a threat actor. Now, with all of those in mind, we have one problem that all of these reign into, and that is the ephemeral nature of persistent accounts and always-on accounts. And Rodney indicated how Microsoft went from so many of them down to 400. How do you do that within your organization when you're not only a Microsoft shop? Just-in-time privileged access management is designed to do that. And it really is the evolution of least privilege security. We know least privilege is the best way to do it, removing admin rights whenever possible. We already saw the statistic that 90% of vulnerabilities can be leveraged against administrative accounts. The problem is we still need to get to some of those systems. We still need a methodology to turn them on, use them, and take them away. And that's what true least privilege is. That's the whole concept of just-in-time. Just enough rights and access for no longer period than necessary to perform the appropriate actions and document those appropriate actions for the teams that need them just in time. Now, let's first consider the concept of always-on accounts or persistent privileged accounts. There's a variety of terms that the analysts will use, but we're really talking about the same thing. These are admin accounts. They could be domain admin, they could be local admin, they could be application admin. You might even find them in a DevOps automation routine. They're always on. Now, they may be managed by a password manager where the password is constantly cycling, but they are still always on. They're still available if you know the proper challenge response to use them. They always have the proper entitlements, privileges, permissions to do the task if you are able to use them. Problem is always on equals fully ripe, fully loaded, can be abused, especially if they're a part of a vulnerability exploit combination that has privileged escalation, or those credentials and hash are scraped from memory. So what we want to do is counter that. find a way to say, look, the threat actor's goal is to compromise that always on account, to gain admin rights so that they can basically conduct their nefarious activity. We want to counter that and negate their highest chances of success by basically not making them always on, finding a way that when they are on, to monitor them, making sure we've eliminated as many of them that are root and admin as possible, and determining appropriate activity. Rodney went through the AI usage that Microsoft is using, and that's a great example. Whether you're old school, small threat hunting and using a standard SIM to look through those logs, or you're really using advanced technology to look through it appropriately and inappropriately, it doesn't really matter. Finding it is what does. So we want to negate the highest chances of success by the threat actor using the just-in-time model. So the concept is fairly straightforward. Never always on, always just in time. Now, the original concept for just in time came from manufacturing. And actually, early in my career, I worked for a vending machine manufacturer. We built vending machines just in time. We would basically have a warehouse of all of the assembly components needed to make the machine with only a few spares in case quality control failed. And a truck would show up in the morning with all the sheet metal, all of the solenoids, all of the electronics. We would build the machines during the day based on that order and load that same truck up and send it out. The concept for just-in-time for privileged access management is the same. Based on what you need, when you need it, deliver it. Don't leave it always on or sitting in a warehouse like parts, making it available for anybody to build at any time. So the strategy aligns the real-time requests and proves whether the person truly should have it, when they should have it, where they should have it from, and grant it and use it with all of those monitoring techniques, including behavioral and context parameters. Now, just to give you some relevance here and to make sure you understand that this isn't a pipe dream, Gartner basically states and recommends that this is the way to go forward. The existence of privileged access carries significant risk. And even when PAM tools are in place, the residual risk of users with standing privileges, that's the always on concept that I talked about, remains high. Security and risk management leaders engaged in identity and access management must implement a zero standing privilege strategy through just-in-time. That's also zero trust when applied to the user and applied to privileges. This is key. So what is the main value? Look at this chart. 168 hours a week, an always on account for an admin is exposed. But if I have a person that needs to do a task for a couple of hours each day, some days longer, some days lower, I can limit that exposure, that risk surface, by only making that account available when they need it and appropriately when they need it to lower the risk surface. So that a vulnerability exploit or even some type of privileged abuse through spray attacks or credential stuffing or something else just doesn't work because the account is not there. It's now truly ephemeral. Think of it this way. Think of all of the always-on accounts that you have in your environment, all of those green triangles. That's every single one of them. The goal is to only allow a few of them. Now, the question is why would you only have a few? Certain things like service accounts always have to be on. It's the nature of the service account. So you'll never be able to completely remove them, mainly from machine-to-machine type identities. But anything from a human standpoint, you could certainly truly leverage the power of just-in-time PAM to make that happen. So how do you actually implement this in an organization? This is the fundamental. This is the meat of the presentation. This can be done with tools like from BeyondTrust. This can be used with best practices in your own organization. But take this as the philosophy to get there. It involves the concept of triggers and it involves the concept of methods. The first portion of triggers is deciding what logical or analytical conditions must be met in order to grant the proper rights. Not the technique, that's the method. What logical conditions are you going to satisfy to say this identity needs privileges, and once I can prove that that's been met, I'm going to grant them. Now, triggers as a concept, and we'll go through them in detail, can be one at a time, they can be sequential, they can be connected via Boolean style logic, so that you could say, I am located in this office on this subnet and it's business hours, therefore I should be able to have it. If I'm running a VPN, not gonna have it. I have a ticket in a workflow system like ServiceNow or BMC or something else, and I've done X, Y, and Z. All right, you've met all the criteria. I will allow you to have access. And that's the key. So there are 4 types of triggers. The first Rodney covered, and it's the most common, and hopefully everyone is using it, is 2-factor. Prove to me as an identity you truly are who you are. 2-factor, multi-factor, done. I've given a high confidence that I am who I am, regardless of the username password combination. The second is entitlements. I'm integrated where I'm aware of my identity governance model, where I'm integrated into an identity and access management solution, and I know what entitlements I should have. I'm an admin. I'm defined in the identity governance model as an admin. I should therefore have access to these systems. It's checks and balances. Context aware. This could be any type of ABAC, attribute-based access control. Location, IP address, group membership, operating system, managed host, whatever it may be. The context of the system and the user in the appropriate place and time is correct to gain admin rights. And then finally, the workflow. I have approval, I'm in a ticketing system, I'm honoring change control, that I should have access. And remember, you can combine any one of these or all 4, but when you satisfy these 4 criteria, I need an account in an admin state or some form of raised state to do the task that I'm supposed to. Otherwise, it may not be there. Now, the technique to actually getting to that point is called a method. The method is really the electronic, the program, the secret sauce of how to actually make it work. Now, again, these can be linked together. They can be used standalone. Some of these you can use with standard tools. Some can be scripted. Some are only available in a product. But it's up to you to decide the best method that works for you. The first method is account creation and deletion. I'm going to create an admin account. I'll let someone use it, and I'm going to delete it. While this sounds great, it's high risk, because unless you're fully documenting the account name, who did it, where, when, what, there is no certification or attestation that you might need for an auditor. It's easy to do, but it has audit and compliance ramifications if you go down this route. You have to fully document, I created the account for a few seconds and then removed it, because you know what? A threat actor may do the same thing. The second method is privileges. Here's an account, I'm going to give it the privileges it needs, and then I'm going to remove it. Now, we always think about permissions on a file system or other forms of unstructured data. This is kind of a technique to get there. So the third method, or the other methods that are involved in this, one is called tokenization. That involves the ability to change the security token for the application. So you're actually not granting it to the end user, it just elevates. And then impersonation, you're doing basically a run as. You're checking out a credential from a source, you're applying it to the application, and you're doing it as a run as. When you tie the trigger and method together, you have a true full just-in-time workload, full just-in-time path. This can be applied to password management solutions. It can be applied to endpoint where you're removing admin rights, or it can be applied to remote access technology. We were covering the first, we did account creation, just-in-time privileges. Group membership is another methodology. This is you have accounts created and you temporarily move them into the appropriate group.
so that essentially they have the admin rights in the admin group and then they're removed. This is a great way to use accounts because now you can prove when they were in the right state or not, and Windows log files, for example, will document that. Impersonation is the quick technique that I mentioned before. This is basically taking the application and running the application tokenized. So you basically intercept it before it hits the kernel, you change its security permissions, and you run it with a higher level of permissions. This is patented technology by some vendors, depending on the methodology that they use. You never give admin rights. The program runs as an admin or a higher state, but not the end user. And this is probably one of the safest methodologies to do that. Techniques very similar to this can be done with AppLocker. You also have disabled administrative accounts. These are accounts that are in the admin group already, but they're disabled. The just-in-time workflow, when using the appropriate triggers, makes them administrative. Then when the task is done or the time is done, they become redisabled. Remember, you can mix and match methods. So it's not uncommon to take a count, stick it into a disabled group, move it into the appropriate admin group, and then enable it. And then any threat hunting or indicators of compromise that you might do would be basically looking for someone trying to use that account when it's not in the proper state. And then finally, tokenization. So very similar to impersonation, you're doing a run as. You're basically pulling the credentials from a password storage or a safe, and then doing a run as so they run with the proper permissions. When you tie the two together, you get the workflow. The end user satisfies the appropriate trigger. Basically, the ticket's open, they're in the right environment, they've satisfied two-factor. You decide on the method, whether they're putting them in the proper group, you're creating the account, or you're giving them the right run as credentials or sudo credentials, and then you monitor them. If user behavior picks up anything inappropriate, you might start doing detailed forensics. You look for things like lateral movement or someone doing a Samba share or running FTP or whatever it may be. You look to see if they're running commands or PowerShell scripts that they shouldn't be to create accounts or copy data out. If there is a problem, a violation, you can proactively stop them. You could turn on more monitoring. If nothing's a problem, you have a clean attestation report, a certification report to use with an auditor saying, yeah, they followed the proper workflow, they were given the account in the appropriate time period, and they completed it and the account was restored. Now, Rodney covered the attack chain in detail. He covered it, end to end. In the middle of his presentation, if you go back to the recording, you'll see a section that says privileged identity. That's what we're focusing on here, because it's true. These threats are coming from the outside. It's rare to see a malicious insider anymore. It happens, but believe it or not, it's a really low percentage. The only time it really happens is when the person's not aware that they became an insider. Those external threats are looking for privileged escalation. Vulnerability exploit, it's a very low percentage. It's coming through because those accounts are present somewhere, or they're being stolen or hacked or something else, for the lateral movement and probing for additional opportunity so that they can create havoc. Most of the time, exfiltrate data or ransomware or cause some other chaos. The key point here is blocking any one of those transition points. Now, from BeyondTrust standpoint, 3 solution sets that all work in just-in-time. Privileged access management in the form of privileged password management, the ability to store, rotate, check in, check out credentials, apply them to your workflow, do it for everything from service accounts to automation and DevOps. Endpoint privilege management is the removal of admin rights across Windows, Mac, Unix, Linux, network devices, using these just-in-time concepts so no one ever needs admin rights to perform a task. And then remote access, the help desk personnel going from one system to another to provide help desk or service desk support, and remote access. And this is incredibly important given COVID-19, providing secure remote access without the need for VPN or tunneling to systems inside of the organization, and then using just-in-time to grant privileges when needed so that they can perform the appropriate tasks. And as Brian introduced myself, there are 3 major attack vectors privileges. The privileged attack vector book, governing how privileges are assigned to end users, asset attack vectors covering vulnerability management, patch management, and the appropriate protections of assets. And then identity attack vectors, how to build an effective identity governance program, and how to basically manage identities, whether human or machine, within an environment. Because these are all three of the techniques as attack vectors threat actors are using to compromise our environments. Second edition of the first book will be coming out at the end of May. The first edition came out about 3 years ago. This is an update including concepts of zero trust and machine learning to apply to many of the techniques that we're speaking about today. And Brian, I really appreciate you letting me jump back in after that system outage.